Welcome to another episode of the Providence Friarcast, presented by PCBB1917.com, your home for Providence College basketball news, notes, and opinions. Now here's the founder of PCBB1917.com and your host, Mike Hopkins.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Providence Friarcast. I want to thank you for joining us again. It'll be Brendan, Chris, and I back together for this first episode of the offseason. Make sure you stay tuned after our discussion for an interview with former Providence assistant, Rhode Island College head coach, and University of Maine head coach Bob Walsh. Bob and I discussed the Providence program from when he got to Friartown in 1998, which was, I think, pre the term Friartown, something Bob Driscoll brought in the early 2000s. But a really interesting discussion with Coach Walsh where he gives his insights and perspective as a head coach and also someone who's been around the Providence program for a long time on where the program is in 2018. Let's get started with our discussion and stay tuned for Bob Walsh. All right, we're back here for our first postseason edition of the Providence Friarcast. Friars finished up the season with a first-round exit in the NCAA Tournament last Friday in Charlotte against Texas A&M in the 7-10 game. Texas A&M went on to kill North Carolina on Sunday in Charlotte to advance to the Sweet 16, but the Friars had an exciting run at the end of the season in the Big East Tournament all the way to the Big East Championship game against Villanova. After in three overtimes, they fell a little short, made their fifth straight appearance in the NCAA Tournament, and as I mentioned, bowed out in the first round. Just give me your perspective on the season, kind of wrap it up for me, and give me a little perspective on where you are in terms of the program in 2018.
Well, I think if you went back to the preseason, and when we first learned that Emmett Holt was going to be out, and then we found out in early December that he had abdominal surgery, and there was no chance for him to play this season, and for this team to make it to a fifth straight NCAA tournament appearance, I would have to consider it a huge success, given it was virtually the same roster as last year, sprinkled in with a couple of newcomers and Nate Watson and Makai Ashton Langford, who in varying spots looked like, promising prospects, and other times they looked like freshmen. Defensively, I think this team showed a lot of grit, especially down the stretch, grabbing key wins along the way against Villanova and Xavier and putting themselves in position going to New York to be an NCAA tournament team, and then playing 3 overtime games in 3 days in a row. Getting that first win against Creighton was a huge step for them. Defeating Xavier in overtime, the top seed in this year's Big East tournament on the second night, validated their stance even more. And unfortunately, they just ran out of gas in that third game against Villanova, going to overtime once again. And they were able to get off that first 4 bubble, which maybe was a bit of a concern going into New York. And then, just unfortunately for the Friars, they ran into a team that had NBA size in Texas A&M and kind of exposed what was maybe an issue all season, especially talking about the 2 young big men in Khalif Young and Nate Watson. Did they really develop to the point, especially on the glass, where you did not always have to rely on undersized guys like Rodney Bullock and Jalen Lindsey to pull down rebounds, and did that really affect their offensive game as the season went on? The amount of defensive responsibilities they have to shoulder, did that kind of affect them down the stretch?
Yeah, obviously it's a disappointing way to end it. They came up against a really good Texas A&M team that is clearly playing, the best ball of their season right now. Tyler Davis and Robert Williams are just absolute monsters underneath. So yeah, it was tough, first round exit, but I think it's all about perspective. You go on Twitter and you see people complaining about another first round exit from Cooley and, this and that. He can't win a game in the tournament. And you got to look at it. He's made the tournament now with this team for 5 straight seasons. And prior to those 5, I don't think Providence had been back-to-back since the Rick Barnes era, which was, I believe, 88 to 90, I think was the last time they went back-to-back before Cooley. So it's all about perspective and where the program is heading. And obviously he's got them trending upward. He's got a great recruiting class coming in, head by David Duke and AJ Reeves. So I think really, if you're a Friars fan, that's really what you need to focus on, and you need to look at the big picture and what he's done over the last couple of years has really been pretty incredible, and they're heading in the right direction. So I think in terms of mindset and perspective, that's really where I am and where I think other people should be.
A couple things there that I think are important to talk a little bit more about when you're talking about Providence hadn't been back-to-back in a while. You talk about Rick Barnes, and you kind of go down the line. After Dave Gavitt, they sort of, Providence was pretty predominantly, pretty openly, I think everybody acknowledged it, a stepping stone job. And now you're at the point where Cooley can go to 5 straight tournaments at Providence, and he's going to stay. He's not going anywhere. So that's another thing to think about, where maybe after the second or third run, maybe after Chris Dunn leaves, a different coach would have tried to trade up, like you're seeing Dan Hurley do now. After his senior class got him pretty far, 2 straight tournaments and an A-10 title, he's now going to UConn. So, who knows if Ed Cooley is a different person, not from Providence, if it's anybody else, if Providence is going to even keep. You could be a URI fan today, looking at your coach who you were really 6 years, you had a great run, and you laid out the red carpet, you gave him a big offer, and you couldn't compete with a bigger job. That's not the problem at Providence. Cooley now 5 straight tournaments. He's got, as you mentioned, the nice class coming in next year with 2 highly rated local kids. Kid he really likes out of South Carolina, and Jimmy Nichols. You got Chris Monroe. They are set up for this next 5 years. And just a little stat here to throw out there to everybody. In the Big East era, Providence has 11 seasons where they won 20 or more games. Guess who has 5 of those of 11? And that's Ed Cooley. The last 5 years, they've won 20 games every year. 6 straight postseasons with the NIT the year before the NCAA run started, which is, I think, 8 or 9 in a row is the longest streak they had, which was under Gavitt, which was a combo of NCAAs and NIT. But just perspective is a word that gets used a lot when teams are, for teams that are out of the tournament now. You got to look back, and some people are more patient than others, and I don't want to make it sound like you and I are just like shilling for Providence and Ed Cooley, but anybody who has been a Providence fan for more than the last 5 years and has a little idea of where this program was when I was in school, and when Keno Davis was the head coach, or when Bob Walsh, who you hear later, was with the program in '98 to with Welsh. When Bob was on the Upside podcast the other day with Adam Finkelstein, and he made a good point. He said the first 5 years we went to the NCAA tournament twice, and they were ready to build a statue for us. So when you look at it from that perspective, from the late '90s, early 2000s to where Providence is right now, coming up on 2020, they got their practice facility opening in August. Really, I don't know how you could be that disappointed. And the other thing too, not to go too long here, but I think the other thing that's important, and I've mentioned it, we've talked about it the last several podcasts and throughout the year, the best way to win in the NCAA tournament is to have a good seed. And the best way to do that is to win a lot of games in the regular season. So right now the formula has been working for Providence, but really what they need to do is maybe tweak the formula a little bit, maybe get the out-of-conference gets a little tougher. I don't know how they do that, but to get to like that 25-win plateau where your RPI is in the teens, not in the 30s and 40s, that's what will make the difference for winning in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think an important thing that you mentioned in terms of stability is he's not going anywhere. Cooley's going to stick around and he's going to stay, and that's important because a program that's been to the NCAA tournament for 5 years, as you said, is often going to worry about that. They're going to worry about the coach, going on to greener pastures, and that's not a concern with Ed Cooley. So I think that's a huge plus, and also just looking at the bigger picture, like we've been reiterating over and over again in the last couple minutes, is the fact that he's losing, a solid group of 3 starters, and yet, it's not going to be a rebuilding year. It's not going to be a break in the success next year with, potentially another tournament run coming next season. So I think that's just a huge plus and a huge positive and kind of a compliment to what Cooley's done is the fact that he can lose 3 quality players like that and still have a good team set up for next year.
So looking ahead at the scheduling, just something we talked about a little bit with maybe tweaking a couple things. They have the Mohegan Sun tournament. The Hall of Fame tip-off will be their November tournament for next season. There's also a rumor out there that they are trying to get a non-conference game with a team from the South and the SEC potentially. So a lot of things out there. We were talking the Gavitt games. Maybe they'd sit out the Gavitt games because they were supposed to sit out this past year. and at some point it's a numbers game. Providence has played in the Big Gavitt games every year. Got to give somebody else a chance. But, Brendan, what do you think about the scheduling aspect? They seem to have a pretty good formula for getting to the 20 wins and getting into the tournament, but is there something that they can look at to tweak the schedule to try to get their resume on another level where maybe 20 isn't the goal anymore? Maybe try to get to 25 wins to get a better seed?
Yeah, I think that RPI point's really key. That would definitely help if they could grab a home-and-home type series with an SEC school. I mean, I think it all comes down to... Also, another thought, it also helps recruiting, saying, yeah, we play, say, this SEC team, every year, home-and-home series, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it would definitely help kind of get out of the, I don't want to say trap of the early season tournaments, but, that's become the norm. And I think maybe for one, RPI purposes, and two, just as a little change, I think it would help going forward to maybe change that up a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. Can you do that? I think PC has maybe fallen into the trap where a lot of other schools where you get wedded to these preseason tournaments and they're not just 2 games anymore in one site. Like we saw with the 2K Classic last year, it was kind of took care of 4-5 games for the Friars. They also had the tip-off, the Hall of Fame, I think the Holiday Classic down in Mohegan against Houston. That was another game that was taken care of. Can they get or link up with an opponent where you don't have to have that quote-unquote tournament umbrella attached to it? And can you get a series going with a team that has nothing to do with, say, the Gavitt games or, like we mentioned, the tip-off tournament? That's been pretty tough because people have always said they don't want to come to the Dunkin' Donuts Center. That's something that Ed Coolio's always harped on in the past, the tough aspect of getting teams to actually come. I mean, we saw this with Kentucky a few years ago, where the furthest east they would come was Brooklyn, and they had to go play in Rupp Arena. That was the return game. Can they get something going, a series with like you said, SEC school that would be more alluring and also helpful in the RPI booster as well?
What are your thoughts about some of the local schools? I mean, UMass was a big. I mean, obviously, it'd be better if you just won the games, but UMass they've lost to them a few times over the last several years. Is that game worth it in a really down 8-10? I mean, maybe they turn it around. The new coach now, after his first year, maybe he'll get it back going. But like playing BC every year, playing UMass, what are your thoughts on some of those local matchups going forward?
Yeah, it's weird. It would be weird to go away from those just because they've been the norm for so long, So it would be odd to think about that. UMass, you got UMass, Brown, URI, BC. Those are like the main ones. We've played Maine in the past. Sacred Heart pops up. They were here, this past season. I think it's important to keep some of those local ties in there, specifically those top 3 of UMass, URI, and BC. Brown as well. Brown has given Providence tough games over the last couple of years. They took an overtime win for Providence this season, and obviously URI is not going to go anywhere. But I think it's important to keep those games in there. So, maybe if you then want to bring in a new out-of-conference opponent, you eliminate, say, like a Belmont or a Stony Brook or a Sacred Heart or something like that. I think that probably helps. But for the most part, I think those BC, Brown, UMass games should remain on the schedule.
Yeah, I will. I'll hop on that point and go one further with today's news about Dan Hurley going over to UConn. Does that kind of maybe push that series closer to the forefront than it was before? You remember Ed Cooley talking about last year about had preliminary talks with Kevin Ollie about maybe starting the series not next year, but maybe a couple years down the road. Does Dan Hurley's presence at UConn maybe thrust that to the forefront, given that UConn has slid off a little bit the last couple of years in terms of the New England scale, where URI under Dan Hurley kind of moved up? Could it be a good thing if have the former New England power taking on maybe the quote-unquote current power in PC? Would that be a good thing down the line? And could that actually happen with the changes of coaches at UConn?
Yeah, I think the UConn game should come back. I mean, that was even before Dan Hurley went there. That's just it makes a lot of sense. I would rather play UConn every year than UMass if you had told me I had to choose. But obviously the benefit to those games is it's cheap for travel. for both teams, and in some instances it's a bye game for the lesser opponent. So, I mean, I agree that it's nice to have those local matchups. I just don't know if that has to be every year for a team like a UMass. Brown, it's in the city, so that's kind of nice, and we'll see how they've had some good players over the years. But even getting back into do you want to play like New Hampshire? I remember when Keno was in Providence, you're playing like New Hampshire, Northeastern. I mean, the schedule has gotten better. I just don't know if it makes a lot of sense to keep playing as many of these local games versus, let's say, you can get. I mean, even if the UConn thing ends up being every other year, you switch who's the home team and you play Mohegan Sun, and you do a charity thing if the NCAA allows, or something like that. That would be something that I think is important. I know that they like coming to the Barclays Center for a couple of times. I think they'd like to get back into that. Maybe a game around Christmas time on a neutral, getting down to New York City. I know the alumni people like Steve Napolillo love that for fundraising. I don't know. Scheduling is an interesting thing, and obviously Brian Blaney does a good job because they've been in the tournament 5 years in a row, and they have a formula that works. But I would be interested to see if they have any tweaks for the 18-19, 19-20 seasons coming up. All right, and before we get into my discussion with Coach Bob Walsh, I want to give a special shout-out here to some of my patrons. That's JLD, John Lee Dumas, Mike Evans, my parents, Adam Nagel, Bob Allison, Ron Torbick, Brendan Ryan, Dan Marcus, Joe DeAngelis, Dennis Corbett, Mike Sayburn, Ray Penza, Dennis Burns, Chris Thurlow, Alex Simeone, G, Terry Meyer, Alan Russ, and Ted Burbage. For as little as $3 a month, you can get access to our Slack community, which is almost 40 members strong now. A lot of good discussion going on about some of the NCAA Tournament games, some off-season news, some recruiting discussion, all kinds of things in our little community over there. So go to patreon.com/PCBB1917 to check out the different options. And without further ado, let's get into the interview with Bob Walsh. We welcome in Bob Walsh, former assistant at Providence from 1998 to 2005 under Tim Welsh, former head coach at Rhode Island College for 9 seasons, a record of 204 and 63, 316s, and an Elite Eight, and most recently the head coach at the University of Maine the last 4 seasons, opting to not pursue a contract extension in Orlando. Bob, welcome to the Providence Friarcast. Thanks for taking a few minutes to talk PC hoops with me.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
So, for anybody who doesn't know, Coach has a great blog, CoachBobWalsh.com. You should definitely go check it out. He recently had something up over the weekend, a blog entitled Owning Expectations. Interesting read. I read it on the plane on the way home from Charlotte this weekend, and I was sort of in the midst of thinking and reflecting a lot on the 2017-18 season, obviously just come to an end. Providence's program and the expectations Ed Cooley has brought upon the program, now going to 5 straight NCAA tournaments, and obviously, inevitably, the narrative starts to shift from where it was when Cooley took over in 2011. He had coming off 3 pretty bad seasons with Keno Davis. Starting to hear a little bit of a small group of fans, Twitter message board type commentary, complaining now about 5 trips but only 1 win in the NCAA tournament. I obviously have my own opinions on that, which I've shared on this podcast a little bit. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts, having been at PC with Tim Welsh during the period when you went to the tournament twice and the NIT twice in the first 6 years, and one of the years getting the 5th seed in the NCAA tournament, which is still the best seed Providence has ever had. So just curious to hear your perspective on the current state of the program versus where it was like 20 years ago when you started there, and whether or not it's fair for fans to expect more now than they did, let's say, 10 years ago.
I'm a big believer in high expectations. I just spent the last 4 years in Maine, to be honest, in a low expectations environment where I spend every day trying to raise the expectations. So I want to be in an environment where expectations are really high. I think, Ed Cooley feels the same way. I mean, he's talked publicly about winning a national championship. So the expectations, I think should be high. I think he's clearly raised the bar higher than any other coach at Providence College as far as consistently getting to the NCAA tournament and being an NCAA tournament team. And I think he'd be the first one to tell you that his expectations are greater than just getting into the tournament. You know, what made me think about that was actually another coach in our league in the America East whose team had some success this year for the first time in a while, and now they're going to be sort of a favorite coming back. And he asked me what my thoughts were on it, and I said, well, you know, you need to understand two things. You need to understand the mentality of your team, and then you need to understand your own mentality and what fits their personality and what fits your personality, and then move forward accordingly. But so I think high expectations are a great thing. I think the expectations at Providence being really high is of value to that program, and I think the fans who want more year after year, I think more than maybe any other program in New England right now or in the Northeast, the passion of the fans really ignite that program. I just also think with high expectations, you can still have a balanced perspective. You know, high expectations does not mean if we lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament, we've had a bad year. You know, you should certainly be disappointed when your season ends and you lose in the tournament, but I still think going to the NCAA tournament at just about every school in the country is a great year. So when I look at Providence this year, I think, man, they had another great year. Now, did they go as far as they wanted? No, but you can have both. You can have high expectations and also have a balanced perspective.
And you can really make the argument that of this 5-year run, there was really only 1 year where they were probably expected to actually maybe make a Sweet 16, and that was the year they were a 6 in Columbus and with Chris Dunn and Henton. Obviously had a little bit of a home court issue with Dayton winning in Dayton in the 11 and then playing. I was at that game. It was pretty clearly a home court advantage. But really, the other years, you're kind of in the 8-9 game. This year, the 10-7. So that, to me, that's the next step for the program, where the expectations certainly can be raised. And I agree with you that I think that a balanced perspective is very important. You have to celebrate the positives, learn from the negatives a little bit, and understand that looking back when I was a student at Providence College, coming off of Keno Davis's time, and even, you know, those 3 years were pretty rough. They had the one NIT but obviously all the off-court stuff. So looking at it from a big picture, it's just so obvious that the program is in a different place. And I think a lot of that is made Cooley, but also some of that is the Big East realignment, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. If Providence is probably, I think Providence is probably one of, if not the biggest winner. Maybe you could argue Villanova, and certainly the programs like Xavier and Creighton and Butler coming from the smaller leagues. But, I mean, Providence being in a position from when you were there where the Big East was like 2 divisions, you played an unbalanced schedule, to see kind of this 10-team league where everyone has similar expectations and similar mindsets as basketball first. What's your perspective on the Big East and how it's benefited Providence these last 5 years?
It fits the personality of the school perfectly. You know, the league, the structure of the league, it's kind of back to the roots of the Big East that Providence obviously played a huge role in the startup with Coach Gavitt and Mike T. So I think everybody in the league has benefited. Certainly you could look at specific schools and say, you know, wow, Providence maybe benefited more than others, but you're right. You know, Butler and Xavier and you know, Villanova's won a national championship and they're consistently, you know, in that 1-2 seed line. So I think that league has elevated all of the programs in it because of the fit for those teams. They know who they are, and they know basketball is really, really important. And the fans should be excited about it. You know, when I got to Maine, somebody asked me about the fans being patient, and I said, it's my job to be patient as a coach, right? It's Ed Cooley's job, it's the coaching staff's job to be patient with their team, with the young players, to bring them along. I want the passion of the fans. I don't want their patience. I want fans who want to win, you know, who want to come in and you know, beat Villanova and beat Xavier and be able to compete with those teams every single year and get to that level. So I think the league and the structure of it really allows PC to flourish under their own identity. The challenge now, to me, Providence basketball has always had this identity as sort of an underdog program. We were the smallest school in the Power Six conferences back then by far. I think when I was coaching there, if you cut the enrollment of every other school in a Power Six conference in half, you'd still, except for maybe Wake Forest, PC would still have the smallest enrollment of any of the schools. So PC's always had this identity as this underdog that can stand up to the big boys every now and then. And the fans love, those Saturday afternoons in the dunk where the magic was there and you're beating a Georgetown, you're beating a Syracuse, you're beating a Connecticut, and doing that a couple of times a year and having a chance to get the NCAA tournament was great. And I think those expectations have absolutely changed, and that's awesome. I think Father Shanley and Bob Driscoll and Ed Cooley would be the first to say, we need to embrace that. And now what do we need to do to make that, next step? Because there's no question with the culture of the program, with the talent that they're recruiting, in the future, they've got teams that should be playing on the second weekend and should be thinking about the Final Four, and how they handle that is going to be really important.
I'm glad you brought up that trio there. I think that's important. And coming from a job at Maine where I heard you on the Upside podcast with Adam Finkelstein recently talking about how you had sort of an interesting situation with there's a new AD when you got hired, and now there's some influx with a lot of the athletic department and the president currently at Maine kind of going back and forth. So just give people a perspective as a coach. How important is it to you to have the solid base and be on the same page with the president and the athletic director of the school, being all on the same page with the head coach, and how important that is to develop a program?
Almost every coach you talk to at the Division I level certainly will tell you that alignment with your athletic director and with the president is crucial. And I'm not sure any school has captured that better than Providence College, right now. Father Shanley has a vision. He's also got an understanding of what Bob Driscoll is capable of and what Bob Driscoll's vision is, and allowing him to do his job. And Ed Cooley's personality, his chops as a coach, his ability as a coach on the floor, the types of kids that he attracts that fit the Providence College model, so to speak, it's all 100% in alignment, and it is crucial. And every Division I coach is going to tell you that's how you have consistent high-level success. And I'll guarantee you when those guys are meeting this spring, they're talking about what they can do better. They're talking about, Bob talks about it all the time, and I love it, a conversation of possibility. That's sort of his approach. And now you're going to see a practice facility go up, and you're seeing buildings on that campus that people 15, 20 years ago just can't believe when they show up to the campus. And I'm not just talking about athletics. You're talking about the entire campus. So the alignment with the athletic director, the president, and the head basketball coach is crucial. And Providence is in a position right now where the vision of those three guys is so well aligned and so perfectly matched that, incredible things can happen.
Yeah, I always tell people the nicest gym that I'll ever belong to in my life is the Concannon Fitness Center when it was up. It's my freshman year. And I'm sure you remember the gym was like that little closet in the bottom of Slavin Center. Literally, it was like someone's closet was with some free weights. So the Concannon Fitness Center, the Raines family has now they're the Humanities Building. They're the name donor on the new athletic facility, which seems to be on track to open in August. So I think that's so important to think about. And I know people are a little nervous. Father Shanley's going on a sabbatical after this semester, so I don't think people should be too concerned. But obviously, it is, as you mentioned, to have that synergy and everyone being on the same page. I think the same thing could be said with the hockey program right now. With Nate Lehman, it's just like all coming together with this group of hires that Bob has done this most recent time around. But you have known Ed for a while. You guys, obviously, that famous story exchanging tapes back in the day when he was at BC. Give people an idea of Ed Cooley's reputation among the coaching community.
I'm not sure there's too many guys that are more well-respected or liked. And those two things aren't always easy to find, but he's as genuine and as authentic a person as you will find in college basketball coaching. So when he talks about relationships, when he talks about what Providence College means to him, what the city of Providence means to him, it's 100% genuine and authentic. It's the truth. It's who he is. So there isn't any shtick to him, which I think is just really refreshing. And look, he would stop by Alumni Hall because, he lived in Providence when he was coaching at BC, when he was an assistant, and his wife was a cop. And he would stop by with coffee in the morning into our office as an assistant coach as another team in the league, and he'd knock on my door or poke his head in at 9 o'clock with a couple of coffees and say, hey, I got to wait out the traffic so I can get to Boston. If I leave right now, it's going to take me an hour and a half. If I leave a half hour from now, I'll get there at the same time. And we just sit there and talk hoops and exchange films, and he just, his personality is genuine, it's authentic, and really, really, really well respected in the college basketball community. And I think you see that reflected in the relationships he has with his players. And look, the ability to attract elite talent in college basketball most often comes down to the connection to the head coach. You can talk about great assistants, and you can talk about facilities and location and tradition, but you look at what Jay Wright has done at Villanova, and you think about, that guy still goes out and recruits and connects with players and families like he's an assistant coach, trying to prove himself. And Ed Cooley does the same thing, and Providence College is really lucky to have him as their coach, but also representing the institution because it's a perfect fit.
And you mentioned the genuine nature. He doesn't really have a shtick. Not somebody who's just going to blow smoke to blow smoke. And talking to kids and parents of kids who Providence has recruited successfully and unsuccessfully over the last few years, it's interesting to me that the one word that I think kind of keeps coming up when you ask, like, what's their pitch to you, what have they been saying to you, almost all the time the word that comes up is he's very honest. And sometimes they laugh when they say that because maybe he says something to them that they wouldn't want to hear, like that they want to hear that the kid's going to start from day one and have whatever. How unique is that for a head coach at a major school to have that level of honesty in the recruiting process, to not just make promises that you maybe actually can't keep, and then, obviously every program deals with transfers and all that, but how unique is that kind of approach in recruiting at this level?
I wouldn't say it's entirely uncommon. I would say that the nature of the business and the rat race, so to speak, and the money that's involved as far as coaches and salaries and the pressure as far as winning, it can change a little bit. It can make it hard. If you're trying to, look, if I was trying to save my job at Maine, we weren't having a lot of success, and I'm recruiting kids, it's easy to get caught up in, well, you know what, let's not talk to them about this, or let's avoid showing them that, because you just don't want them to see any of the warts. And so it takes a comfort level as far as personality, but it also takes a comfort level, with your school, with your boss, in your position as the head coach. So I wouldn't say it's totally uncommon. Most coaches aren't out there lying to kids and being successful, but it's amazing how often you hear that from kids. If you talk to my players, to Ed's players, to the players at Rhode Island College, to recruits who are juniors, and you say, what's most important to you? They say, man, I just appreciate the fact that he gives me the real deal, that he tells me the truth. And it is a little bit uncommon because the reality is you might have to look at a kid who you think could be really good at Providence College and you think could really help you, who is not a good fit for the school, or something just isn't right, and you think, man, you have an opportunity to go there, and I'm not sure what you're looking for you're going to find here at Providence College. And so I think that authenticity is crucial to being a successful leader at any level. I think a lot of times it gets muddled by the high pressure, high stakes of what's going on in college basketball and college athletics, and Ed Cooley's strong enough not to let that affect who he is.
So I mentioned at the top you're not continuing on it at Maine. What's next for you? You going to take any time off? You want to just get right back into coaching?
I don't entirely know, which is kind of exciting. I've never been in this situation before where there's some opportunities that maybe you see or present themselves to you that when you have a job you don't really look at, or they don't come your way. I'd love to take a year off and go on sabbatical and go visit other teams and learn from other people. But, I also like eating dinner at night. So, I do need a job. It could be coaching. Certainly I want to coach. I absolutely would love to keep coaching, but it doesn't have to be. So I've said to a lot of people, everything's on the table. I've been able to get involved in some leadership development stuff in the Leadership Academy that I run in Providence, that I started at Rick, and, some media stuff, some podcast stuff. So I absolutely want to coach. I could easily see being an assistant coach, which I haven't been in 13 years. When you're the head coach and you're kind of, doing what's comfortable for you, you're not necessarily learning as much as you used to as an assistant when you see different perspectives. So, I don't have anything close right now. I'm just sort of settling in and figuring out what the next move is. But some sort of coaching or leadership position is absolutely what I love to do, and I hope to continue.
Make sure you follow him at Coach Bob Walsh on Twitter. Visit CoachBobWalsh.com. Coach, I really appreciate your time, your perspective, and for joining me on this episode of the Providence Friarcast.
Anytime, Mike. A lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Really good discussion with Coach Walsh there. I want to give him a special thank you for joining me during a snow day on Wednesday to talk some Providence basketball. And make sure you're subscribed to the Providence Friarcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Now that we're in the off season, you'll probably hear some more episodes that are interviews. We'll have some more guests, and then we'll eventually get into some recruiting discussion. Ed Cooley down in Georgia on Thursday, looking at a 5-star recruit, Ashton Hagans, a 6'4" point guard, Chris Dunn lookalike, somebody that probably right now in the class of 2019, although it's possible he could become 2018. But just make sure you're subscribed. Give us a rating and a review. We'd really appreciate it. And we'll talk to everybody soon.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Providence Friarcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Follow Mike Hopkins on Twitter and Instagram
at PCBB1917. Like the Facebook page, and as always, stay classy, Friartown.